it, or there should be more transparency about the casualties, or what was it that you were looking at that worried you?
Ultimately, what concerned me, what really made me cross the line between going, this is a concern and this is something that actually moves people to action. It provided me with a duty to act, to stand up and say something about this, was the deception of government officials. I mean, we can have secret programs. The American people don't have to know the name of every individual that's under investigation. We don't need to know the technical details of absolutely every program in the intelligence community. But we do have to know the bare and broad outlines of the powers that our government is claiming broadly and how they affect us and how they affect our relationships overseas. Because if we don't, we are no longer citizens. We no longer have leaders. We're subjects and we have rulers. Democracy is about participation. And if we're denied the information that we need in order to vote about the policies that we want in this country and the boundaries of our rights that we as a people think are appropriate, we're no longer really free. We're beginning sort of a descent into a less free, less liberal, and more authoritarian society. And when that descent begins, it's very difficult to reverse. When the government claims a new power, when the government institutes a new program, it's very difficult to get them to give it up, regardless of whether it was legal, regardless of whether it was lawful. For example, in the Bush administration, we had a warrantless wiretapping program that was it was unlawful. The DOJ agreed that there was no statutory constitutional basis authorizing the program, and that it should be shut down. When that happened, however, what we actually saw was, despite the fact that the program was considered unconstitutional, the DOJ said they wouldn't back it. The president had his cabinet go to the director of national security at the time, Michael Hayden, in secret, and ask him, would he authorize the program without a statutory basis if the president requested it? And he thought about this, and this is detailed in a classified document called the Inspector General's Report on Stellar Wind, published in the Washington Post last year. And he said yes. Regardless of whether it had a statutory or constitutional basis, if the president requested it, he would do it. And that's really the challenge. What happens when our government, when our most senior officials use secrecy to unchain themselves from accountability to law and democracy? And if we allow that to happen, that's really a road we don't come back from.
Well, I know that, or at least I've read that in 2008, you were very hopeful that some of those abuses of power that took place during those years, in the Bush years, would be corrected. And we have a different administration with a different point of view that is at the very helm of which is a constitutional law professor. And so I know that I don't want to put you on the spot in a place that's uncomfortable to be, given that you may have to negotiate with the same administration. But how are you, I suppose I wonder, how are you feeling about the possibility that there really will be reform within the spectrum as we know it from Democrat to Republican in the U.S. governments?
Regardless of negotiations, regardless of the relationship between myself and the administration, whether it's adversarial or cooperative, ultimately I don't think it's my place. I'm not going to put it upon myself to advise the president as to what he should or should not do. That's a role for the public, for our institutions of the press, for us as a community, us as a society, to decide what kind of things we believe in and hold our representatives to account in demanding that they actually champion those policies as opposed to those which would be most convenient for them at the time, whether that's politically or reputationally. In terms of will we get reform, I think this is the question that's actually not just on the public's mind, but on historians' minds. Because when we look at the changes to policy that happened in the Bush administration, the authorization of torture, warrantless wiretapping, the unitary executive theory, and basically the idea that more and more we as the sole superpower should begin accepting ourselves from the rules and standards of behavior that we set ourselves for the rest of the world, it's something that should change. And if that's the case, when we look at the surveillance revelations, all the things about mass surveillance that we learned in 2013, they provide a mandate for change. And the question is whether or not that mandate will be used, or whether history will record that as a point where we had an opportunity to change, but our chose not to do so.
People have said that whistleblowers generally are moved to disclose crimes, and one of the complicated situations that you're in is that what you revealed was not a crime, but maybe a moral or ethical or political crime in some ways in the way you looked at it. Do you feel that leaking was the only form of check and balance that could have corrected this?
Well, there is definitely a point in every institution and every process where the final check on the abuse of power is whistleblowing. However, I would dispute that there have been no crimes shown. In fact, we've seen serial violations of law. In the wake of these revelations, we had people testify to Congress that I believe more than 12 times NSA employees had used these surveillance powers to spy on exes, to spy on lovers, and that's a felony. However, none of them were prosecuted because it was considered that the value of the programs was greater than the interest of justice in basically punishing people who had violated the law. The false claims of senior officials to Congress was probably one of the most serious crimes that a government official can commit. And that was only revealed by the revelations that we saw in the investigations that followed them up. Beyond that, these programs themselves are unconstitutional. Again, the very first judge who ruled on this found that they were likely unconstitutional. It will go to the Supreme Court, and I am confident that the Supreme Court will agree that these programs went too far. The problem with this is, and what critics claim, the people who are supporting mass surveillance claim, is that if these things are authorized by statute in this way or that way or the other, the Constitution doesn't really matter, because the Constitution does not assign penalties for violations. But our system of government is founded upon the principle that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So when we say that, yes, a statute may have not been violated in this particular instance of this particular case, when you look at the totality of circumstance, it is very clear that several different amendments of the Constitution, whether it's our right to freely associate under the First Amendment or the Fourth Amendment right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure, has been violated on a massive and unprecedented scale. A system of surveillance that is unauthorized by any kind of constitutional authority has never existed in this country in this manner. And we've seen public intellectuals, we've seen lawyers, we've seen specialists from all areas of society agree that this is the case. And were this not the case, were it found that these programs were indeed constitutional, that this was indeed authorized by statute, and that the government could simply invest itself in secret with the power to watch all of us without limit, store 5-year records of our behaviors, and retroactively investigate us at will, I would argue that it is still proper and still correct to reveal these programs because of the strength of the response. Ultimately, governments exist for the benefit of the public, and if they are no longer serving our needs, if they are working contrary to the public interest, as opposed to working to further the public interest, that's something that we deserve to know. That's something more than we deserve to know, that we have a right to know. And when officials in the American government are asked to swear an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, I believe they're bound to stand up and act when they see this kind of behavior and do something about it. And I could be wrong, and I'm willing to face history's judgment for that. But I stand by that decision, and I think the reaction of the public, the fact that the internet of the structure of the internet since that period has changed, shows that there is a lot of agreement, and I am not alone in taking that position.
It seems Silicon Valley is, to some extent, also trying to make some changes, correct? In trying to close some of the back doors that the government has used to spy on users.
Right.
the government is still arguing that this is going to cause egregious harm and that they won't be able to keep people safe from. They've used, examples of child predators and things like that. Are you worried at all about whether or not they need to be able to get into people's, Google and Yahoo, Apple, whatever, in order to keep the public safe?
So I have a somewhat unique perspective on this because I was specifically hired to basically hack hackers for the NSA. So I've gone after hard targets. I know how they operate. I'm obviously quite familiar with encryption myself, given the fact that the NSA publicly claims they still have no idea what happened. But we'll leave that there. The reality is that encryption is not something that prevents the investigation that properly authorized law enforcement investigations. If you are a criminal and you encrypt your phone, and I suspect you of a crime, I can go to a judge. I can present a showing of probable cause, get a judicial warrant that will allow me to use law enforcement tools to gain total access to your phone. Even if that phone is encrypted, even if there are pictures, even if there are messages on it that are protected by the strongest encryption that exists today, the key has to exist somewhere on that phone when the user, the criminal in this case, is viewing those pictures, viewing those documents, or they themselves would not be able to read it. Encrypted data, when it's not paired with the key, is illegible. It's garbage. It's just junk data. So when we're talking about investigating someone who's using this information for a crime, they're storing evidence and things like that, as soon as they access that data is available to law enforcement if they go through proper procedures and use proper tools to steal the key that is then able to decrypt that information. So beyond that, even if encryption were, let's say, this unbreakable, impenetrable shield that law enforcement couldn't get around on the phone, we live in the cloud era. When you take a picture on your iPhone, it gets uploaded to their service called the iCloud. That data is not encrypted. That data is available to, Apple can respond to a subpoena from the FBI and provide a copy of that. When you make a phone call with an encrypted phone, the phone records there don't go to Apple, they don't go to Samsung, they don't go to these other phone manufacturers, they go to AT&T, they go to Verizon, they go to Time Warner or whoever you use for your services, for your television, your internet, your phone. And again, these are unencrypted. They're available to law enforcement. Your phone is only a gateway into these different networks. The transmission of information is not controlled by you. Your phone can be encrypted all day long, but it's just a gateway into a global network that's being comprehensively and sometimes unlawfully monitored in a way that we've never seen before in human history. So for law enforcement agencies to complain and say, we're concerned we're not going to be able to gather information in our investigations is not just ridiculous, but it's actually offensive because it implies that they're not more powerful now than they have been before. And when we look at their classified documents, what they're saying in private as opposed to in secret, which we now have a rare chance to do, we see that they call today the golden age of signals intelligence. They say we have access to more information more easily than we ever have before.
Okay, I have a few questions now that fall into a category that I know is not the favorite of anybody at the NSA, where personal is described as, or extroverts are described as the person. When you're talking, you look at the other person's shoes, right? That's the extrovert, as opposed to your own. And so it's not a place known for chattiness. But I just wanted to ask you a couple sort of mild questions about your life. One is, what you miss most about America at this point.
I mean, the only question, whenever I think about that, the question is, what don't I miss? Whether it's my family, whether it's my home, whether it's my friends, whether it's my work at the agency. I was fulfilled and happy. I think it's critical to remember that the revelations of last year, the actions that I took, were not specifically about surveillance. That's a misreading. It's not a complaint about policy. It's about the accountability of government. It's about the relationship between the governing and those who are being governed. And if we allow that to slip, we lose what our country is. So I was willing to make